Welcome everyone to this first seminar of the Digital Classicist Berlin series. I don't know if all of you know the Digital Classicist, but I wanted to put up the description from the official website. So first of all, the Digital Classicist was a project started by Dr. Gabriel Bodard, although it would be difficult to keep saying Dr. Gabriel Bodard. So, and I really like some words from the description that are the Digital Classicist is a community and is international, has an interest for innovative technologies applied to the ancient world, and has no core funding and is not owned by a single institution. So this is part of the whole idea of the Digital Classicist. What we are trying to do here in Berlin is to have the similar idea but at a local level. So it's a multilingual, multinational, and there was the idea of trying to do it here in Germany. So who is organizing this here? It's not the DI, it's not a single institution. The people organizing the seminar are in the audience. There is Markus from the Berlin und Brandenburg Academy for the Wissenschaft, and from the same institution, Nora, Unger, and Fabian Kölner. And then there is myself and Felix Schäfer from the DRI, from the Deutsche Archäologische Institut, and then there is Dominic Lucas from Topway. So people from different institutions try. It's a coalition of the willing, basically, and we try to do this year. The support doesn't fall from the sky, but it's from Topway and the DRI, the German Archaeological Institute, for this year. The main aim is the community building, to start a conversation, a dialogue, exchange ideas, innovative ones in particular. And the choice of the language was in English so that we are able to reach a broader audience. But one of the things that we have done was to set up a Digital Classicist Deutschland, so Germany mailing list, not to create a parallel strand to the Digital Classicist one, but just to allow for a conversation also in German about more local things. And by the way, there is an attendance sheet that we can circulate during the seminar, and if you give your email address, we will make sure that you are also in the mailing list so that you can have updates and so on. So the format is a presentation of half an hour, 45 minutes, followed by discussion, a first part of more formal discussion, and then there will be wine and informal discussion until we have things to discuss. So this is the relaxed idea of the seminar. The program, which I put online, you will see the announcements on the mailing list. There are two venues, here at Topway, and basically from here to the end of the year will be alternating between the DRI and Topway, and for the 2013 until March, when is ending the seminar, will be at Topway. But all the details are in the program. We are also planning, and I think we can say we will do it, we will post online all the videos from the lectures so that the conversation can grow beyond the physical event. On the website you also find the RSS feed from the blog and the website, and the Google Calendar. There is a public Google Calendar with all the events and updates and details so that you can stay up to date. But let's now move to the speaker and to the first presentation of the seminar, to the keynote. So the speaker is Dr. Gabriel Bodard, who is currently based at King's College in London in the Department of Digital Humanities. He has been leading since 2007 several projects related to digital inscriptions and epigraphy at King's. As I said already, he's founder of the Digital Classicist. He has been organizing with other people since 2006. The Digital Classicist Work in Progress Seminar in London, which is taking place during the summer, and it's another activity in the same area and field. He's editor of the store.org, the website, and also the Suda Online. Still? Was. Sleeping, yeah. Since 1998. And then he's also a member of the technical council of the TDI, and he's one of the people working on the Epigraph standard. But I won't talk more.
Thank you, Matteo. Yes. Thank you, Matteo, and thank you everybody for the invitation to come and speak here. I'm extremely honoured and grateful to be invited to speak here in Berlin. And I should open with an apology for the fact that I'm going to be speaking in English. I'm afraid I'm a barbarian when it comes to your language, and you'd thank me for speaking English if you heard me trying to speak German. So we'll have to cope with that. Most of the slides that will be going up behind me, however, are effectively my lecture notes. So if the language is an issue, then the notes might help with that. The quick point about the format. I'm generally speaking much more comfortable with a sort of informal back and forth discussion than I am with me standing here non-stop talking for an hour. So I mean, I don't plan to go on for an hour. If it looks like I'm going to go on for more than 45 minutes, please throw things at me to make me stop. But also, if anything I say is either incomprehensible or you think needs more discussion, please feel free to interrupt me. I will actually be grateful for that. I find the sound of my own voice non-stop probably more tedious even than you do. So I'll talk a little bit today. I'm talking about digital epigraphy and where it has come from and where, in my view, it might be going. So I'll talk a little bit about the background of epigraphic corpora on which the digital epigraphic corpora are based. I'll then talk a little about the digital corpora. I'll talk only about 2 or 3 of the main digital databases of epigraphy, primarily because it could take several days to talk about all of them, even all the major ones, but also just because I think they summarize a little bit the state of play. I learned a little bit more today about the OpenCIL project, which I think could very fruitfully be brought into this discussion, but it's not something that I know enough about to have included here. I'll talk a little bit about user reactions, and this is one of the things I'm interested in, is how people react to these databases and whether the way digital humanities scholars think about databases gels with the way the epigraphists who use them think about them. And I'll then talk about an example from papyrology and one direction in which I think digital epigraphy could go in the future to answer some of the issues that have been raised in this discussion. My suggested direction is not entirely dissimilar from some of the suggestions that have been made by other people, including the OpenCIL and Eagle projects. And I think that's not coincidental. We're all, I think, moving in the same direction. So first, a few quick words about the background. If everybody in this room is an epigraphist, you can ask me to skip these next two slides because they're both obvious and probably naive to such an audience. But very briefly, there are two kinds of print corpus of inscriptions in very general terms. There's the CIG and CIL, now IG and CIL corpora, which are attempts to produce a complete, geographically organized, comprehensive, and thoroughly re-edited texts and editions of all Greek and Latin, respectively, inscriptions from the ancient world. These corpora have been going for nearly 200 years in one case, over 150 years in the other case. They're obviously not complete and comprehensive yet, because that's an impossible task given that we're finding thousands of new inscriptions every year, or at least publishing new ones every year. But they're very, very large. They, as you see, tens, hundreds of thousands of texts in the printed editions, according to the websites. The other kind of corpus are the print summaries, the annual summaries of new publications. So these don't attempt to build a corpus of all epigraphy across the entire Roman or Greek worlds, but they attempt to give a full and comprehensive summary of new publications of inscriptions from any given year. And they're usually published somewhere in the region of 5 years after the year they're summarizing. So the 2012 edition of SEG, for example, I think will be publications from 2008 or something like that. Is that? If anyone knows I'm wrong, please say so. So those are the two different kinds of print corpus that have been used in the past. These are the background to the digital corpora that I'm going to talk about, and we'll think about some of the ways in which these digital corpora are more or less like one or other of those models. Are they attempting to be comprehensive across the entire ancient world, or are they comprehensive within a much more limited scope and attempting to fill a niche of their own? So the first corpus I'll talk about, simply because it's chronologically the first one founded by a whisker, is the Packard Humanities Institute Cornell database of Greek inscriptions, which was founded in 1985. Various statistics about it up here. The website has been online since 2007. The corpus basically contains text. There's not very much metadata attached to it at all. There is some geographical information, as in just the name of the place the text is from, the bare minimum. There is some bibliographic information, which might in some cases include a bibliographical history, but in the minimum case will list the one publication from which the edition in the database is taken. And there's almost no documentation of anything really about this database. The website of the database doesn't tell us who is compiling it, doesn't tell us what their collection criteria are, doesn't tell us what their editing criteria are, doesn't tell us whether they're taken verbatim from print sources or whether they're re-edited for the database. They don't tell us how many inscriptions they have. I happen to know that there are 208,000 inscriptions in the database at the moment, but I wouldn't know that just from looking at the website. Likewise, I know from having spoken to people and from having heard about this over the years that they've had various different collection strategies over the years. They have a team who generally go through publications and add to the corpus various inscriptions on a fairly methodical basis, but they also have occasionally, fairly sporadically, funded a particular project to do something very specific, and everything, as a side effect of the funding, everything has been incorporated into the database. So the database is of fairly mixed coverage, and some would certainly say mixed quality as a result of this collection strategy. But my point is that it's hard to know any of this because we're not told this. This is what you can't really read it up there, but that's not so much the point. This is what an inscription in the PHI database looks like. This is one of the ones which has quite a lot more bibliography than the average. So it'll say at the top, it'll say a title of what kind of inscription it is. It'll say that it's found at Aphrodisias, several pieces of bibliography, and the Greek text. No apparatus criticus, no commentary, very little information about the find circumstances or the object itself. And none of that information, in any case, even the small amount of information that is captured in that title up there is searchable, at least through this interface. So only the Greek text is searchable in there. A description of the goal of the project, there is this one website which does discuss the history and the goals of the PHI project. This is the personal website of John Mansfield, which was online until a couple of years ago when he died, and his personal website then disappeared, and so this text here is only accessible through the Internet Archive. It's not something that the PHI website itself makes available. This points out that the point, according to this document, of the PHI corpus is not to be a new and coherent in itself publication of any of these inscriptions. It's purely a search mechanism. It's a way to find the texts and know where to go and look them up in the books if you need more information. That's the way it's described here. It's to allow the text to be searched as quickly and efficiently as possible. The second database, which was that I'm talking about, which was founded only a few months later in Heidelberg, is the EDH, the Epigraphic-Datenbank Heidelberg, which has been online since 1997, now contains some 65,000 texts. Each edition of each text contains fairly detailed supporting and analytic data, including lots and lots of possible search terms, various information about the object, about the people within the object, various commentary type information extracted out into database formats so as to be searchable and browsable, contains detailed bibliography, photographs, each in separate databases, and each text has been, we are told by the website, re-examined and re-edited from either from photographs and squeezes or in some cases from autopsy by the compilers of the project, of the database, of whom there are currently, I believe, 3 full-time epigraphists working in this team. So not only is the editing process apparently more, well, the editing process, one could surmise, rightly or wrongly, that the editing process is maybe more thorough, but that may or may not be the case, but we have information about the editing process, which we don't for PHI. EDH is, of course, also part of the Eagle Federation, which is made up of several databases, primarily Heidelberg, which is responsible for the Roman provinces, Rome, which is responsible for the provinces of Italy, Bari, which is responsible for the Christian inscriptions of Rome, and Alcalá, the Hispania Epigraphica site, which is responsible for the inscriptions of Iberia, of Spain and Portugal. An edition in EDH looks something like this. This is not one of the most full editions. I picked one more or less at random for this screenshot, but you can see there's lots and lots of fields of information, and the text down here is almost an afterthought. It's not just for searching the text. In fact, the fact that many of these fields are empty here doesn't matter so much because you can't read it from here anyway, but you can see that there's quite a lot of information in there. And here's just a statement from the EDH website saying in detail that the texts are re-edited by the team. The third corpus I want to talk about is the largest of these corpora, the Klauss-Slaby database, which again, although it's very large, nearly 500,000 texts in total according to the website, it lists itself as containing almost all Latin inscriptions. There is very little documentation or information about the agenda or the editing and collecting criteria of this database online anywhere. I wasn't able to find from the website or from anywhere else a definitive answer to the question of when this database was founded. I was told informally by someone who knows about it that it was founded in the late 90s. The website of the address of the database is not a university site or a URL that has necessarily gives the impression of being permanent. It is apparently the personal domain of the manager of the database, Manfred Klauss. So the information about where this database comes from and what it involves is relatively thin, and it's fairly clear that the reason they were able to enter so many texts very quickly, if they've been going for only 15 or so years and have almost an order of magnitude more texts than the other databases we've been talking about, is that this database collects pretty much only the raw text. There's almost no metadata, apparently even less than in the PHI, and it also draws heavily on other databases that are already available, and that's obviously a good thing because you want to share data between the other databases. Again, a screenshot of I couldn't find a page which showed a single inscription only on the Klauss-Slaby website, which is disappointing because I would like to be able to have a URL that I could point to one given inscription and know that URL is not going to change. But that didn't seem to be possible. So here is that the best I could find is just the search results. I could narrow down these results until I only find one inscription, but it would just stop. It would stop here, so it wouldn't be any different. And as you can see, there's very little information there, whether you can read it from this distance or not. And there's a bit of bibliographical information. There's a province in which the inscription was found, and then there's the text. And that seems to be it. So again, there are many more databases I could talk about. I could talk in particular about some of the other Eagle databases which have fairly different histories. The Bari database has been going since again the late 1980s, and the Eagle consortium only came into existence at the end of the 1990s. So these databases have a certain history of their own, but using just those three databases we've talked about there as an example, because those are the three most prominent databases, I think. I want to talk a little bit now about user reactions, particularly the reactions of epigraphists who don't necessarily have any background in or interest in digital methods or digital humanities technologies, but obviously, being epigraphists, they want to be able to find things in inscriptions, and so they use these databases. The difficulty of discussing user reactions is that no one has ever, to my knowledge, no epigrapher without much interest in digital matters has ever written a review or published an article saying what they think of all these databases. I mean, that's almost impossible, because once someone made a decision to write such an article, they would have an interest in this sort of thing and be thinking about it more critically. And so the kind of reaction I'm interested in is people who aren't necessarily thinking about it critically, but have opinions about it nevertheless. So the first source of as a result, I guess all that preamble was to say is that everything I'm going to say in the next 3 slides is extremely insecure, because you have to take my word for all of it. I can't footnote any of this. The first source of information for user reactions is a roundtable discussion on digital epigraphy that I co-chaired with Charlotte Tupman in Cambridge in, I think, 2007 at a meeting of the British Epigraphy Society, at which several senior epigraphists were present, not only from Britain but also from Germany, including some of the senior editors of some of the print corpora that we talked about before. And I was expecting and hoping in this roundtable discussion to have a little bit of conversation about the ways in which digital publication of inscriptions could lead to better opportunities than print things, and where there were more limitations than print corpora. The reaction from the audience, from the group as a whole, however, was fairly one-sided, in that they had decided that A, we weren't talking about all digital publication of inscriptions, we were only talking about the big databases, and B, these databases were the work of Satan, basically. And so the kind of comments we got there were that these databases, and they grouped them all together with no real distinction between them, were so incoherent and therefore inconsistent and therefore unreliable as to be completely useless. Comments were made such as, you can't trust these, so you always have to, after searching in them, you then have to go to the indexes of the print works as well to be sure that you found everything. There were comments such as, you can't cite these databases. There was even a comment that a work in progress, and I quote, is no use to me. The implication being that these databases should not have been published when they'd only been going for 25 years and only covered a quarter of the Roman world. They should really wait 100 years until they've got the whole of the Roman world before they publish. Otherwise, it was irresponsible. These were real issues. I find it fairly hard to describe this with a straight face, but these are issues. Not, I think, none of these are stupid comments, even if some of them seem bizarre from a digital humanities perspective. But they're a problem for a database if you're attempting to disseminate information this way, and the very audience you're attempting to disseminate to is this hostile to the very idea of disseminating in this way. The second source of information is even more unreliable than this, because there were other people at that workshop who could, although it was 5 years ago and they may not remember the detail, they could more or less confirm what I've said. General impressions that I've had from people, these all come from, these are all more or less exact quotes from people who've come to me, epigraphers who come to me knowing that I know something about databases and digital epigraphy, and said, what's the best way for me to find out more about Roman inscriptions? And so I've laid out some of the possibilities for them, a little bit as I did for you a few minutes ago. And they've sort of looked at this and they've said, well, okay, you seem to be saying that EDH maybe has more robust metadata and whatever, but if Klauslobby is the only one that has everything, that's what I'll use. And they completely no interest in any other aspect of metadata, of transparency, of robustness, of carefully re-editing texts as opposed to texts that they may or may not be highly accurate, but we don't have any way of telling, we don't have any confidence in saying that. They're only interested in the number of inscriptions. And the last comment I put on there is people have said they went to the websites and looked around and they've seen, I mean, EDH's description that they are entering the text of all the provinces of the Roman Empire, starting with, I think, Greece and moving counterclockwise around, and they've so far got as far as Germany, and leaving aside Italy and Spain, which are being dealt with by other databases, and said, well, if they've only got Eastern Europe, that's no use to me. The website now includes a map showing whether all their inscriptions in the database are located, and that's obviously not just Eastern Europe. I just mentioned that more for amusement than anything else. I think this is a real challenge, though. I think, as you can probably tell by my slightly partial description of the databases, that I do think that quality and detail, especially metadata, are very important for a database of this kind. Scale is obviously important too. More or less important depending on what kind of search you're doing. If you're doing a search looking for an example of a particular kind of text, you don't need to know that you're going to find every single text, and just a few tens of thousands of texts is probably representative enough to find you a couple of good examples. If you're interested in every occurrence of a certain word in classical antiquity, then you want a database which has as many results as possible. If, however, the very large collection of the very large database, which has hundreds of thousands of inscriptions, is of lower quality, and I'm not specifically talking about either of the large databases that I've talked about as compared to Heidelberg or Rome or any of the smaller ones. But if you have a larger database, because you've decided that scale is more important than quality, how much confidence do you have in the large database, given that the quality is potentially sacrificed to scale? The issue, I think, is more complicated than that. I think the issue is that a lot of these users, the traditional epigraphists, they don't trust databases at all. So they're like the people who say, I never trust anything I read online because Wikipedia is crap, which is, a fallacy. Or even, just saying I don't trust Wikipedia because someone, vandalized it once. But there is an issue of perception of these databases. The importance of all the additional kinds of data you can add to the database, the kind of things that I've talked about, Heidelberg including, obviously are evident in many ways. The more data you have, the more ways you have of searching or of browsing your collection of data. The more data you have, the more possibilities there are for connecting via some kind of linked data mechanism to other kinds of projects, geographical, prosopographical, archaeological databases that have information overlapping with and of further interest to the users of an epigraphic database. This I guess is the challenge. What do we do to bring these two perceptions together? The perception that scale is the only thing that's important, and the very, very clear, from my point of view, advantages of detailed and structured data. So there are various answers to this, and we could, at this point, the last time I gave a presentation on this subject, in my department, I stopped basically at this point, and it then just became a discussion about what can one do about this issue. Rather than do that today, I want to move into another slightly different direction, and this would be particularly controversial if I was speaking to a room full of only epigraphists, which is to say that I'm going to take a lesson from papyrology here, which is a very different discipline, and it's worked in different ways. But in the last few years, a project called Integrating Digital Papyrology, directed by Josh Sozin, the director of the Duke Databank of Documented Papyri, and with the collaboration of James Cowie from the Heidelberg Gesamtverzeichnis, has basically been working to bring together the 55,000 odd texts in the Duke Databank, which were of roughly the same kind of quality and richness of data as the PHI that I described. They were very similar. They were founded at similar times and work in similar ways. It's basically text, a tiny bit of bibliography and some location information, and almost nothing else. Almost no apparatus criticus, almost no supporting information around that. And the HGV database from Heidelberg, which contains nothing but metadata, no Greek texts, nothing but bibliographical and object metadata about pretty much the same and 99% overlapping corpus of Greek papyri. So there are about 55,000 texts in each of these databases, records in each of these data sets. And also bringing into this collection, the IDP project, some 30,000 catalogue records of papyri from the libraries that hold them. Some translations, a relatively small number in the hundreds rather than the thousands of translations of some of these texts, and some unique identifiers, and this is very important, from the Trismegistus Project in Belgium. The project basically had 5 main aims. To migrate the data in each of these several data sets into Epidoc XML. That part of the project was run by my team in London at King's. Secondly, to build a papyrological navigator, which is a search and browse interface, and also has a linked data backend, which was built first at Columbia and then at New York University. Then building a community editing program called Sozol, which was built at the University of Kentucky, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's the bit that I think is interesting and we could learn from. Fourthly, we ran a fairly large-scale training program for papyrologists to get them to use this community editing platform and use it to enhance and improve and make more coherent the data in the databases. And fifthly, to produce documentation and dissemination of the both of the data being produced and of the software and the software principles that it was built on. And I mention that separately because, as anyone who's ever run a digital project or been involved with a digital project knows, you always say you're going to document and make sure everything is widely disseminated, but at the very end, when you run out of money and time, that's the one thing you forget to do that gets dropped off. So that was a big deal. It was one of the cases where the funding body actually said, look, this is so important, we're actually going to give you more money than you asked for to try and make sure you do that bit. So that was a fairly big deal. So just a screenshot of the front page of the Papyrological Navigator. The URL is easy to remember, just papyro.info. The search interface is quite interesting, but that's not what I'm going to talk about here, and I'm already quite far behind my schedule of how long I was going to take. But to talk about the editor aspect, the Sozol, the papyrological editor tool, the tool contains a management interface. The point of that being that there are multiple editorial boards for different kinds of data that are being managed in this interface. And each of these boards will vet all contributions or emendations that anybody makes to the data set. So there's no selection criteria. Anybody from the most senior professor to the lowliest graduate student or member of the public can register and start suggesting emendations straight away, but not a single thing will appear on the website until it's been through the editorial board. So complete insanity doesn't get through. They have the option to either reject an emendation, send it back to the proposer, and say you have you need to make this argument stronger. You need to give us more supporting material or bibliography for this, or we just don't believe it. To say yes, we accept this. This is clearly better than the current reading, and include it in the data set, or to say we think it's a perfectly valid reading. But on balance, we slightly prefer the one that's currently in the data set, but this is good enough that we'll put it in the apparatus criticus as a valid alternative. There's a fourth option, which is to say spam, but that hasn't been used very often so far because we haven't had that much of that kind of thing. The tags-free editing aspect of the papyrological editor involves the creation of a syntax called Leiden Plus, which is just a very slightly enhanced version of the Leiden principles, which papyrologists and epigraphists use to mark various information about the content of the text and the physical condition of the text and whether something is an emendation or not. And the value of this is that the number of people who are qualified and willing to edit papyrus texts using Epidoc can be counted on one hand with several fingers chopped off. I mean, not a huge number of people are willing to do that much work. Using Leiden Plus, we have 600 registered users on the site, probably only half of which have entered more than one text, but still quite a lot of people who've done a certain amount. I forget the exact number, I haven't checked recently, but there are certainly thousands of new texts and corrigenda that have been added or proposed to the database so far. Some of the most active and promising users to this have been, on the one hand, professors who have used the papyrological editor as a training tool for their students, and so have got a class full of students entering text and amending texts. So large amounts of information have been entered that way. And one of the other most valuable parts of the user base are individuals who have a love for papyrology and, should we say, don't have anything better to do with their time. I mean, someone who's maybe was a papyrologist, then had to get a real job because there's only 3 people in the world who can feed their families based on their papyrology alone, and then 30 years later have retired and can get back into papyrology again. There's one man in particular in the Netherlands who spends every Friday entering texts in the papyrological editor, and has done so for over a year now, and has entered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new texts into the editor. So the kinds of people who enter these things are not necessarily the ones you would first think of. They're not the professors who are also publishing papyri. They may be other people who are working around the community. So is this papyri.info model a model that could be adapted by epigraphy? IDP was possible because papyrologists are quite proud of this Amicitia Papylogorum that they have. The Duke Databank and the Heidelberg database combined was pretty much the only database of this kind in papyrology. There was no rivalry, there were no multiple databases entering the same texts, but according to different principles. This is partly because papyrology is a young discipline. Papyrology literally didn't exist until the 1880s because that's when we started finding papyri in the Egyptian desert. at least in any numbers. But another reason is that the papyri, almost all being in Greek, presented a serious issue with digitization, and so that really slowed down the work of entering this until the technology was mature enough. And so I think the combination of those things has meant that this was a lot easier to do in papyrology because there wasn't this proliferation of databases that I've described in epigraphy. Epigraphy has many of these databases, in particular the Latin databases where there was never this encoding problem. Epigraphy, not to put too fine a point on it, epigraphists tend not to be proud of the Amicitia Epigraphicorum because it's a discipline that's been around for much longer. There are many more practitioners. It's been running for a long, long time. There are, in particular, in Italy and in Germany, there are several very senior figures in epigraphy, not all of whom see eye to eye. And so there are these databases which are in not necessarily conflict as in battle, but have conflicting and inconsistent collection methods for not only technical reasons but also for political reasons. So it is much more difficult. We couldn't just take all of the epigraphy databases that I described and do with them what we did with all of the papyrology databases in the way that IDP did, because it's just not. It's both technically and diplomatically more difficult than that. On the other hand, the epidoc encoding scheme that the papyri are now using is already being used by a large number of projects in epigraphy. None of these projects individually have tens or hundreds of thousands of inscriptions in them, but they all have at least hundreds. And several of the databases have, including some of the very large ones, have started working towards being able to not enter all their texts in Epidoc, but create Epidoc-compatible output from their databases. Some of them are doing this already. Bari already have a way to do this. The Jüdischen Grabstein Epigraphic-Database, Epidat, it's not a classical inscription database, but it's an early modern one. I think it's 17th and 18th century Jewish graveyards in Germany. But they have some, remembering off the top of my head, I think 80,000 inscriptions, all of which are collected in a database, but there's an automatically generated Epidoc output from it. And certainly some of the other databases are thinking about doing this, if not doing it already. For a full list of all the projects that are using or have used or are thinking about using Epidoc, there's that page in the Digital Classicist wiki. So other reasons why the sort of doom and gloom background that I gave 2 slides ago is maybe not as bad as it looks. Are that the Heidelberg and Rome databases and the Igor databases in particular are already massively collaborative. Not only with each other in that they have this attempt to make all the databases searchable from a single interface, but that each database is not only compiled by its full-time staff sitting in an office in Rome or Heidelberg, but there are scholars, teams of students, collaborators overseas who work on inscriptions, look at inscriptions, send the information to the database, enter their data in the database in their format, are trained in the use of that. They're already in the habit of collaborating with people who aren't necessarily sitting in the room with them. And all of the Eagle partners, as I've said, have been in contact with the Epidoc community. Some of them are already using Epidoc actively. They're all interested in the ways in which Epidoc can be used. And other projects in other areas of classics, linked data projects, such as Pleiades and Pelagios, have shown the value of interoperability and interchange, I think, in a fairly convincing way. They've also shown the necessity for collaboration and the futility of just saying, oh, this doesn't work. This is just rubbish. I'm not going to use it. you can't just, if you want to make something work, you have to do a little bit more about it. You have to engage as an academic, and I want to talk in a minute about how academics do need to engage with this sort of thing in order to make the resources better and make the world, the information available to the world slightly better. I was just going to flash up the Pleiades website and the Pelagios project, which is built on top of that. I won't go into any detail about that. They're both very much worth following up if you want to know more about them. So a little bit just of I'll rush through this because I am coming to the end, but I'm aware I'm behind schedule. So okay, yes, we're academics. We're producing, and I say we in this room, also we, including the people who build epigraphic databases, also including epigraphers who don't build databases but complain about them. We're all academics. But I think it's true everywhere in the world, even Germany, that we can no longer safely say, we're academics in our ivory tower, no one can touch us, we don't need to engage with the world. Right? That I don't think, maybe no one's ever said that, but we can't claim that our only purpose is to train future academics and create publications that other academics will read. Right? We're also, we serve a larger value in society than that. We also engage and educate people who are not going to become academics. Right? Most of our undergraduates don't go on to become academics. That doesn't mean they've wasted their time studying classics or whatever they've studied with us. There's a value to what we teach, even outside of the academy. Even if, to the extent that what we do is entertaining to the public, that I think has a value, and we should not pretend that it's not a core part of what we do. Our publications, likewise, are not just for other academics to read. As academics, we should be writing popular history that will be read by larger numbers of people than purely people who are at university and being forced to read it by their professors. We should be editing popular resources like Wikipedia. Again, anyone who says, oh no, you can't use Wikipedia, it's full of mistakes, but doesn't themselves fix the mistakes in Wikipedia that they find, should just shut up right now. We need, therefore, if we're going to engage with the community, with the world like this, we need to educate ourselves as academics on digital scholarship and on digital culture generally. And we need to know how this works and how people engage with it in order to be able to communicate to them. So what would a citizen's web of inscriptions look like? Well, to start off with, we have to have some linked data in there, which means that we need to be able to assign URIs to each individual digital record. That's fairly easy if you're coming from a database background, because each record has a unique identifier. All you need to do is make that identifier transparent through the web presentation of it. Preferably, that URI should also be the URL that you go to look at that inscription, because that way everyone knows what they're doing. Even someone who doesn't really understand the difference between a URI and a URL can just click in the bar, copy and paste, and put it somewhere. This then allows community annotation and enhancement of these collections, even before you get to the point of people being able to edit the inscriptions themselves. People can then make comments using some very standard linked data vocabularies about these various corpora and these various URIs that are out there. They can make an OWL same as statement that this inscription in the Heidelberg database is the same inscription as this one in the Klauss-Slaby database, or as this inscription in the Inscriptions of Aphrodisias Online. You can say, using an OAC related statement, that this inscription is related in some way to this object in an archaeological database. You can say that this person in a prosopography is related in some way to this lemma, say, in an epigraphic index. You can use slightly more specialized vocabulary such as GORD, the Graph of Ancient World Data, and you can say this inscription or this papyrus attests to this name for this place in the Pleiades Gazetteer. You can essentially end up having what is a massive database without having to get all this information and force it into a single database format and take the control of this data away from people who've been building these databases for in some cases 30 years. But you can have a massive decentralized database about which you can make all these sorts of statements. It's especially more powerful if you open license all this information, because that allows people not only to point to and make statements about it, but to make copies of it, to adapt those copies. The more copies of something there are, as the Locke's adage has it, the more copies there are, the more likely this is to still be around. The reason books last hundreds and hundreds of years is not because paper is more robust than a hard disk. It's not. Paper will burn very easily as well. But because no one ever just made one book and put it in one library, or if they did, it no longer existed. There were thousands of books spread around the world, and several of those copies survived. Same principle applies with digital material. Once you have this stuff open licensed and people can make copies of it, you can then have this SOZL approach to community editing. This approach is already being used not only in the papyrological editor that I've described, it's also being used by Perseus, the Homer multitext, the canonical text services, the Charter project of early modern Spanish texts, and those are the ones I know about. It's an open source software, and there's a community of people using it. This is a form of scholarly cyber science, slightly more gated than pure crowdsourcing, but it's a way to get people who are invested in this to help improve the resource that they're invested in and that they're using. The advantage of it I like to think of is because once you've got some information up there, even if it's to start with low quality information, people will then start shooting at it very quickly. And the best way to improve something is to put it up there and let people shoot at it. If you make it easy for them to improve it, and you know the people who just say, no, this is rubbish, I'm not going to use it, are told to shut up often enough, then this will lead to revision and enhancement of this material. This is, I wasn't going to say anything in detail about Europeana, but the model would fit in quite well with this already massive European-wide digital library of cultural resources. And so finally, just to summarize what I see this citizens' web of inscriptions that I'm talking about looking like is a database, or rather a decentralized set of databases with means to communicate between them, with an editing interface that enables you to propose additions or emendations to any of the kinds of material in this decentralized data set. Editorial boards at each individual node of this decentralized data set, so that nobody forces Heidelberg to make changes to their database that they haven't approved at every step of the process. And I think very importantly, a two-way data migration process. This is something that Heidelberg with the papyrological database have been doing, which enables them to export all their information from their database into Epidoc so that it can then be accessed, merged with, interacted with, linked with all of the other information in the IDP datasets, but that it can, and it can then be enhanced and improved by users, but that it can then be pulled back via the same process into their database, because the people in Heidelberg, they like FileMaker Pro. They want to be able to edit it using that interface. Let's not question that taste, but sooner or later they'll realize they like the XML more, and that they can do more with it, and they'll stop needing to. But I think it's important that that the people feel in control of their data sets, and that they won't, we're not just asking everyone to give us their data so that we can put it into our database and improve it here, and they can disappear. But most importantly, once you have all these data sets in an interoperable format and system, you then can start building relationships between the epigraphic data and various other kinds of data. So the one thing that has never been possible before is to have a single search interface where you can search or browse across a set of texts and get results from both epigraphy and papyrology at the same time. Or to be able to search across an epigraphic data set using information about location from Pleiades as one of your search filters. Or to search across a papyrological epigraphical data set using prosopography and the various prosopographical data sets out there as one of your search filters. So I think this is the point at which we're really talking about a web of resources becoming possible in a way that has never been possible with the older databases, and you couldn't imagine being possible just with books at all. So I'll stop there.